All right, guys, welcome back to the Bombs and Birdies podcast. In today's episode, we are talking all things course management. We're going to be going through some statistics here to give you guys more of a realistic representation of exactly how you should attack the golf course, how you should attack specific flag sticks, what flag sticks you should try and avoid. So without any further ado, let's dive right in. So we have a couple examples here that we're going to provide on the screen. However, one of the things I want to make mention, and we're going to be going off the average like 10 to 14 handicap, because that's probably about 99% of the population that plays. And
so that's the data we're going to use, but this concept applies to any handicap.
That's correct. That's very. So the better you are, the tighter your dispersion pattern you can mitigate. But obviously, if you're anything worse than an 14 handicap, then obviously you have to aim a little bit broader and play a little bit more conservative. But again, at the end of the day, this method and this strategy is not designed to help you make more birdies, because I think that's that is not the way to play more golf, is try to make more birdies.
No.
It's to avoid the bigger numbers. We're trying to avoid we're essentially trying to avoid doubles or worse 100%, but if we can avoid bogey at all costs, that's essentially what we're trying to do.
Yeah, so for those of you who aren't aware, the difference between a 10 handicap and a scratch golfer is like not even one birdie per round. It's the fact that they don't really make doubles very often. They might make one a round. It's crazy, actually. One of the best golfers at my golf course, we play a men's league, and so we play I think about 20 rounds in a year.
Yep.
And all that data is tracked, so you can see the stats. The top player at the club, he's club champion quite often, he made one double bogey all year.
Wow.
In men's league.
That's incredible.
Yeah, incredible, right?
That's actually really incredible.
But that's why it's not like he goes lights out making all these birdies and
Yep.
stuff like that. I mean, yes, he's going to have more than most players, but he's not making them left, right, and center. It's maybe one around, two around. If he has a really good day, 3 or 4. But again,
birdies,
the average is probably about 1.5 to 2.5 birdies per round.
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially what we want to talk about today is that, let's use the example of a 14 handicap. A 14 handicap from 100 yards, or 90 to 110, let's use the example of 100 yards, is only hitting the green 52% of the time.
Okay, so half the time basically from 100 yards.
Yeah, from 100 yards, you're only hitting the green 50% of the time. And on top of that, when you do hit the green, your average proximity is 40 feet.
Right, so you're not draining a whole bunch of birdies doing that,
So
right?
like when you're standing in the middle of the fairway and you're 100 yards out and you hit the green, that's a good shot. Like, I don't know.
No matter where it is on the green,
no matter
you should
where
be
it is, like
very happy with that.
Because most greens are not like crazy big
Right.
for the average Joe, but like 40 feet might be like, well, that's so far away. It's like, well, yeah, for the average 14 handicap, like hitting a shot on the green from 100 yards is a good shot.
Yeah.
Right? So if we take that concept and roll it into 150 yards, which is what most people will have approach-wise into most par 4s,
Yeah.
some par 3s are going to be average of 150 or maybe a little bit less for the average Joe.
Yep.
You're looking at only 38% of the time.
Yeah, so that's closer to 1 in 3 times, right? So if you're 150 yards out and you hit the green, you should really be kind of patting yourself on the back, right?
100%.
And I think if you even look at the data for breaking 80 a lot of the time, one of the best pieces of advice is to obviously like hit more greens, right? And we're going to talk about how to hit more greens here in a minute. So we'll give that away. But, that's a big difference really from hitting more greens at 100 yards, which would be about 50%, which is kind of that magic number, right? When you want to break 80, you kind of have to hit around 50% of the greens.
Correct, that's correct. Yeah. So, and this kind of directly goes into what we talked about on a couple other videos where we talk about like distance is very important.
Right.
And I mean, bringing it just back to the statistics, like that is... It's true. Like
so,
I was going to just say, like this is true. So for the average Joe 12 to 15 handicap, you're looking at, for every 20 yards, you're looking at almost 20%, almost not perfect science, but almost 20% worth of greens either hit or missed. So that means if you're hitting it 20 yards closer to the hole on either approach shots off the tee, you're going to statistically you're going to have a 20% greater of a chance in order to hit that green just by changing a statistic that has nothing to do with mechanics.
And that might be the big answer right there, right? So if you were, say, like a 14 cap, you're shooting maybe mid to low 80s, your dream's to like break 80, or you've done it maybe, but it's very rare for you. If you could actually just get to being 100 yards from the hole off the tee instead of 150, which that's a lot to ask, admittedly, right? But, we could at least make up quite a bit of that fairly quickly, like 20 to 30 yards, would you say?
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, like within a course of a couple months.
Yeah, I mean, it just kind of all depends on who you are. I mean, the like my clients, the guys that I work with remotely, they essentially are like, my big thing is like, if I can get you those 20, 30 extra yards, it's not going to be with every club in the bag, because it's just the shorter the club, you're just not naturally going to be able to hit that hard. But if I can get you from 150 yards closer to that 100-yard marker on most par fours from where you play, or give you that 20, 30 extra yards off the tee, you're statistically going to essentially go from, if we use this data here, from basically call it the high 38 percentile to the low 50 percentile. That's like almost a 12% or a 14% jump, and we've done nothing with your mechanics.
Right, and I think it works two ways too. So, for example, let's say you added 25 yards off the tee, right? Yeah. So, okay, you're going to hit it 25 yards close to the hole, so we've got half that gap there. You're halfway to being like, breaking 80 every time.
Yep.
But the other thing is that now that you've got more speed, instead of at that distance where maybe you were hitting an 8-iron before, now you're hitting a 9-iron or a wedge, which even though it's from the same distance, the higher lofted club is going to be more accurate, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and your dispersion is not going to be as wild, just because the more loft you have, the less spin loft you're going to have, which means it's going to be basically curving and less in each direction.
Right. So if you could imagine maybe someone who's 7 years old and they're trying their best, but they're hitting a low 3-wood from 150 yards versus like a Tiger Woods who's hitting a wedge from 150 yards, obviously, he's going to hit it a lot closer because of his trajectory, etc., the spin, the control. Okay.
Exactly. So let's dive into this here. So example number 1 is we have a back left pin. Okay. We have a back left pin here, and we don't have the exact specs, but we wanted to use this as an example, and let's just use the example of that the green is from left to right, the width of the green is in and around 40 feet.
So we're just going to say overall for you at the home, this is going to be a smaller green, essentially. It's not
Correct.
A massive green, and most courses are going to be smaller due to cost and things like that.
For sure.
Yeah, they build smaller greens, yeah.
So let's use the example that the width of the green is 40 feet. So we know, and let's use the example, this is a 150-yard shot into a par 3. So it's a back left pin. It looks like, from what we can see here, you got about 4 to 6 feet left of the flag. You probably got 10 or 15 long, and you have basically just over the bunker, you maybe even have less than 10 feet short of the bunker, or from the bunker to the pin, and then you have the end of the earth to the right.
Right. So this is a pin probably where, some players might go straight at it. I think some players might intuitively say, oh, I'm not going to go right at that pin. It's a sucker pin.
Correct.
They might aim a little bit away from it, like 5 yards away or something. But what are you suggesting we do here, Colton?
So basically, the way that I would play this shot specifically, if we go based off of just the data alone, if we have 150 yards, the average Joe is going to be hitting it about 40% of the time. So 4 to 10 times, you're just hitting the green. Okay. So that means that 6 out of those times, it's either going to be, let's use the example of half those shots are long for a righty, are long left, and half of them are short right. Due to mishits, that's just statistically what would happen with a righty golfer. So if we go half the shots are long left and half the shots are short right, I'm probably not even aiming at this flagstick at all.
Yeah.
Right? Because if we shift our dispersion pattern closer to aiming right at the flagstick and we hit the green 40% of the time, that means only 4 shots are finding the surface off of a good shot, and six of those shots and 6 of those shots are going to be finding not the surface.
Right. So. Right. I think what we get into here is a little bit of an interesting concept where, some players will look around and they'll say, every hole you've got to sort of have a strategy for this hole and whatnot. Right. But as you can see, we got 2 dots on here. So the first dot, the orange dot, is the center of the green roughly. And the second dot is sort of where you decided to aim, and I went ahead and measured this.
Correct.
And it was only 2 yards off from that center position.
Right.
And now I could see if we sort of started to move this pin around, I'm going to ask you here, if this was a back middle pin, where would you aim?
A back middle pin, I would still be aiming exactly in the middle of the green.
Okay, how about a back right pin?
It's still in the middle of the green.
How about a middle pin?
The middle pin, you can pretty much go right at it.
Right at it.
And then obviously anything in the front, you still want to err on the side of it being closer to the middle of the green.
Right, so that's maybe the one where you're going straight at the pin, is those middle ones, right? I can imagine if it was like a middle left, middle right, it's probably the same answer.
Yeah, it's pretty close, but again, it all kind of depends on the data and the statistics of how far you're hitting or how close you're hitting specific clubs. So like I said, if we're using a 150-yard golf shot and we go off of a 12 to 15 handicap, we're hitting the green 40% of the time. So I'm probably erring on the side of it being in the middle of the green no matter where the flagstick is, just so I can account for the misses. I'm not accounting for the good shots, because the good shots are going to be the good shots.
Yeah.
You're going to give yourself an opportunity to make birdie. It's the shots
that are the 60% that you're going to miss.
It's the 60% that you're trying to tailor to. So if the 60%, and you're missing the green 6 out of 10 times from there, it's like, okay, well, where, if I was to miss, what's going to give me the best opportunity to make par? It's
right.
or sorry, to avoid making double or worse.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the thing that a lot of people at home maybe could see. You know, Ben Hogan said that he always aimed for the middle of the green, and
Right.
that was one strategy that is difficult. And we're not saying that's necessarily always the best answer.
Right.
I think as you get better, as you know a course better, you might know a little bit more where to aim. But I think we're urging you at home to maybe go ahead and just try this strategy. You might be surprised based on the stats and the numbers we have here that it might work out a lot better than you think, or that the best place to aim just might be the center of the green a lot more. So
yeah, and I mean, a lot of people are going to be like, oh, well, just aim in the middle of the green. I already knew that. But it's like, how often do you actually do that?
yeah,
You know what I mean? You're
it's
like,
a lot
okay,
harder to do when it's actually there. You see,
you're like you're playing with your buddies and you're like, okay, Jim, how, like, they laser, how far's the flag stick? Okay, well, it's 150. Okay, I'm gonna hit my 150 yard club. Well, no, there's a lot more factors to take into consideration. It's like, okay, where's the pin? Where's the wind? Where's the spot to actually miss it in order to give myself the best opportunity to either make 3 or avoid making double? Like, that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, and we see a lot of these, you know, I think probably on social media and whatnot, people draw these sort of similar charts on there, and they really get precise into, like, where you're placing it, etc. I mean, for one, it's really difficult to, like, it's one thing to do that over you know, an overlay on a photo. It's another to actually be on the golf course and know where that is, like your actual aim point is on the course, right? Whereas the middle of the green is something that you should be able to figure out relatively easy. The other thing I just want to bring up too is, like, there's a massive differences there between being on the green putting or even just off the green in a supposedly safe area chipping. Like, what's the difference there? Is it significant?
It's going to be pretty monumental, and there's a lifelong saying of, like, you're always going to be able to hit a putt closer than a chip.
Right.
So, and it's not even about putting versus chipping. It's like, how close are you in relation?
Yeah, because the chip, I mean, a good chip shot might be 10, 12 feet, but the chances of making that are very low compared to a putt, which might go 6 feet, 4 feet, 3 feet.
And the percentage of just making a higher number with a putter is a lot less than making it with a wedge.
Gotcha. So it's really those blow-ups we're trying to mitigate too, right?
Like, we're not necessarily trying to make and force more birdies. Those will just happen naturally or even by accident sometimes. Okay. We're simply just trying to avoid making double or worse.
Gotcha. And that's probably something that you know,
it's a weird concept.
I would say for me, like, I'm definitely always tempted to, like, let's go for this pin, like, and you get that feeling of, like, greatness when you really attack it. But I think the other thing is, like, based on this data, you'd be surprised on this first hole how many shots you just have the face a little bit closed and they end up being so good.
Yep.
It's probably the same number as if you aimed right at that pin, right?
Yeah, because, like, this is part of the reason why we're aiming in the middle of the green, because it's like, okay, well, if our miss is long left and short right for the average right-handed player, and you aim at the flagstick and you hit the pull, you're even further left and you're making a big number, because now you're short-sided. You have to hit, like, this, like, open face flop shot maybe. You have to get really creative, where it's like, okay, if we aim in the middle and accounting for human error, we do pull it, 30 out of the 60% of the time, you actually hit the flagstick by accident.
Okay, here's the thing I want you guys to keep in mind. When Colton's telling us even where to aim, you know, he chose his spots here. They are, like, pretty much the same as the center of the green, and he's like a plus handicap here, right? So you can imagine for these players that being conservative is, like, totally the way to go, because obviously your miss hits are going to be very much fewer than a player who's a 5, 10, 15, 20 handicap. Yeah. So we got another example here. Yep. This is a par 4. A shorter player might have anywhere between 200 to 150 yards in. I'd say that's the average golfers. Yep. If you're a skilled player on this, or a longer player, myself now included in that, I would maybe have closer to 100 yards into this hole, or even less. Sometimes if I can really cut a corner or something, or hit that sort of miss that's a draw, it might even be 40, 50, 60. What are we going to look at here for an aiming point? Okay,
so first and foremost, if you hit it in a greenside bunker, you're looking at least 2.5 shots over par to essentially finish, like, complete the hole.
So bunkers are, like, they're really seriously, like, not a place you want to be.
Not, like, I would say almost 8 to 9 out of 10 times, like, if you hit it in a bunker, depending on what your handicap is. Let's just use the example of let's stay on track here with, like, the 12 to 15 handicap, maybe even a 10 handicap. You're not getting up and down, like, 70 to 80% of the time. You might get up and down twice. Right. So if the goal again is not to hit it closer. It's to avoid the big misses. So if we have the pin that's essentially right here, it's in the middle of the green, and we know based on our tendencies, long left versus short right, we want to, a good shot with the inner circle here, A good shot is actually taking the risk of missing the green like about 20% of the time.
Okay.
So if the pin is in the middle, I'm actually aiming 5 to 6, possibly even 7 yards, even from 100 yards.
Right.
For the average, because we know based on 40 feet, 50% of the time we're hitting the green is going to be on the average dispersion of 40 feet. So
Okay.
if the green is less than 40 feet, then we're in trouble. You just have to sack up and hit a
Right.
good shot. But if the green is big enough, I'm aiming like 4 to 5 yards right of that flagstick to account for the pull,
Okay.
like the occasional pull, 33% of the time. And then if I hit a bad shot short and right, I have an uphill chip in this scenario where we miss the green on the right side. I'm chipping back towards the flagstick. Whereas if I aim at the flagstick, hit the pull, now I bring the bunkers in play, or I have this delicate downhill chip shot, and then we start to run into some issues.
Okay, 2 interesting points here. One, we didn't even draw a pin placement on this hole.
Right.
And, I think it mostly changes. You might adjust your yardage slightly if it's in the front, I would think.
Sure, yeah.
If it's on the back, though, you're probably not going to go for that at all because, again,
Correct.
My second point here is we've got 1, 2, 3 bunkers,
Yeah.
and the part that you can't see at home. These bunkers are not good to be in, but they're actually protecting you from an even worse outcome, which is going off the edge of a cliff in this case.
That's correct.
So there's a very danger zone going
That's correct.
off there, but I'd be guilty of this. I'd be guilty of maybe like a middle left pin placement.
Yep.
And pulling out my rangefinder, zapping the flag, and then just taking dead aim
And
at
hitting
it.
it right at it.
And hitting it right at it. And then, you do hit that shot that's a little bit like trapped.
Yep.
Next thing you know, you're in one of those bunkers, or it goes a little bit nuclear. Maybe you're in the
Hit it
rough
over the bunker.
and you hit it over, and then
then
you're
you're
like
really
totally dead. You're making
Yeah.
like a triple.
Because this is actually a really well designed architectural hole here, because you have bunker number 1 that's essentially guarding the front pin,
Right.
bunker number 2 that's guarding the middle pin, and the back bunker which is guarding the back pin.
Right,
So it's
right.
kind of a really, really tough shot. So regardless of where the pin is, no more often than not, only because we've played this hole before, more often than not, it's not really going to be on the left side too often.
Mm-hmm.
So majority of the time, if it's a front pin, I'm still aiming in the middle. If it's a middle or middle right pin, I'm aiming on the right half or right section of the green.
Right.
If I miss the green, it's a fairly easy chip, not a big deal.
Yeah.
Anything at the back, I'm still aiming in the middle, because if I hit it short right, I have a ton of green to work with, and if I hit it long left, I'm actually going to be either pin high, still putting, or I'm at least pin high, where I can get up and down fairly easily. Because if I aim at the flagstick and it's super long, then you're chipping back downhill, back down grain. You maybe flub it because you could try to get cute with it, or you airmail the flagstick to the point where you have like a bogey putt from 50 feet, and now you're making double or triple.
Okay, so the name of the game is really like, again, reducing those blow up holes.
Yeah.
With the birdies, they'll come, but like again, they're not like frequent for really any player. And in this case, I think a good lesson or a takeaway for you guys at home is on both these examples, we adjusted it on the first one 2 yards.
Yeah.
Approximately on the second one, we aimed about 5 yards. So maybe look at the hole simply, because again, we're out there having fun. We're having fun with our buddies, maybe
Yeah.
having a drink, fooling around. Take a look at the hole, detect the danger zone,
Yep.
aim just at the middle of the green, and then a little bit away from that danger zone,
1,000%,
right?
Yeah, and it even goes all the way back to, even if we listen to like some of Tiger's sound bites. I know we talked about this earlier.
Right.
Some of Tiger's sound bites is like, well, Tiger, how many pins did you aim at over the course of a round? He's like, maybe one.
Maybe
yeah. One. So it's like the best player in the world, and at least in his era, and most of these guys in the PGA Tour have adopted this method, is like, if you're not aiming at if those guys are not aiming at flag sticks and they're the best and the best of the best, why ever are you?
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
You're
yeah.
like, you are no, and myself
Yeah,
included.
yeah, yeah.
I include myself in that scenario. I am not that good, and you 100% are not that good. So we need to avoid. It's about letting birdies happen almost by accident, and just kind of letting them come to you, and then obviously avoid making the big number. So like when I'm playing tournament golf, and I'm 100 yards out, and the pin's in a really tuck spot, my ego, I have to be like, I want to go for this flag stick. I know it's a birdie opportunity. I'm
Right.
inside of 100 yards, I'm inside of 120 yards. I know I can score here, but it's not the time.
Yeah.
Right? Which is why you don't see so many like really, really deep scores on a Sunday of the Masters or for whatever tournament the PGA Tour is playing, is because they have these pins really, really tucked in specific positions.
Yeah.
Because the guys are like, well, if you go at the flagstick, there's a huge risk. There could be a reward, but the risk doesn't outweigh the reward.
No, yeah, and so you can, if you're really trailing, you can really start to go for things, and there's a slight chance you might pull off enough of those shots in a row to get
Yep.
you back in the mix, but more often than not, you'll see players sort of like take the bait, right? You know, we can think of the Amen Corner par 3 at Augusta,
Absolutely.
right? And
Yep.
the year Tiger one, I just saw a great compilation of like 7 players that were in the mix. It was like DJ, Jason Day, and they all like went at the pin and missed it, and they ended up in the water, and Tiger just stayed right in the middle, and it was like, that's what 20 straight years playing at the Masters looks like, right?
Again, it's not especially on a hole like number 12. The goal is not to make birdie. The goal is to get out of there unscathed and not make bogey or worse, or not make double or worse in the case of like a 12 to 15 handicap.
Well, actually, if we look at what we started this podcast off saying, right, it's like even a scratch golfer, they might be making around 2 birdies per round, right? A pro might be like slightly higher, right? Yep. If you could just be a pro going into a weekend and say, right off the bat, I'm going to make nothing worse than a par this weekend.
Yeah.
And then they're going to make 2 or 3 birdies a day. You're going to win a lot of tournaments.
I'm actually glad you brought that up because, and the only reason I'm glad you brought that up is because Charles Howell III, one of my favorite players on the PGA, well, not anymore on the PGA Tour, but like one of my favorite players of all time. I love this guy's golf swing. Charles Howell has kept his card for like over 20 years. Okay. Guess what his average PGA Tour average scoring average was to par over the course of his career. I don't know. It was even par or slightly just. I think it was right around even par. It was like basically 72 scoring average, and he's made. I have to double fact check, but he's made over like $10 to $12 million in his career.
That's crazy.
And shooting even par.
Just shooting even
and
par.
You're like, oh well, like I know of Charles Howell, but I would never think that a guy that has a 72 par scoring average. And that's what keeps your card, and that's what keeps you making checks, and that's what keeps you making cuts. It's not about, like, don't get me wrong, you're going to have the top 1% of the 1%, the Rorys, the Scotty Schefflers, the Xander Schauffele's, the Colin Morikawa's. You're going to have those guys, but you're not playing like that week in and week out for a long period of time. You're going to have your hot streaks. You're going to have the time when your putter gets hot. You're going to have the time when you don't miss a golf shot for a while. You're going to have a time when you don't make bogey a lot of the time. But the guys that you don't necessarily see on TV all the time, and you would like... basically flying under the radar, that have a fucking 72 par scoring average, and they have like incredible careers. And you would like never ever know. So it's like you don't need to necessarily try to go out and make 4, 5, 6 birdies around.
The answer's not as far as you think, people.
It's not. It's like let's try to shoot. Well, in the sense of a scratch player, like if you shoot par, like you're on pace. Maybe that stat has changed since when I looked at it last. But it's not necessarily about how can I make more birdies. It's how can I avoid the big number.
Well, and I think that's a cool thing. A lot of people maybe have a target in mind. Like they want to break 90, they want to break 80, right? Yeah. And that's sort of like a lump sum goal.
Yes.
That's sort of like a one-time goal. It's like, I'd love it if I could shave 4 strokes. That's actually the wrong way of thinking.
Yes.
And if you get involved in the way of this mentality of improving, of looking at the numbers, working with the coach, having accountability, doing all these things, your sort of goals vanish.
Yes.
And the only path forward is just better.
Yes.
And there's no limit. Yep. It's like, wait a minute, you might be out there at home being a 14 handicap, being like, I'd love to be a single digit. Guess what? If you start to follow that path the right way, it's not going to be a 9, because the year after that you're going to be a 7, and then you might be a 5, and next thing you know, you could be around scratch.
100%. And I mean, it's still, like you said, like it's not as far away as most people think, and I think that they're like, most people are like, oh, I want to hit more greens. Okay, well, you have to be able to hit it further to account for that statistic.
Yeah, the easiest way to hit more greens.
The easiest way to hit more greens is to get yourself closer to the hole. How do you get yourself closer to the hole? You have to have fucking speed to be able to do it. Like, It's really not that complicated, and I think a lot of people are like, oh, I got to get my mechanics in a good spot. Yeah, sure, absolutely. You need to get them to a degree.
Which you'll help them do.
Which they'll, absolutely. But like at the end of the day, the biggest needle mover, and because of it's easier to hit the green the closer you are to the hole, people have still not caught on to the fact that, like, listen, like, if you can gain distance, you're going to hit more greens, period. And if you hit more greens, you're going to have more fun. You're not going to be shooting the high scores that you are, and percentagely, you're going to be able to play better.
And for any haters out there, it's not just about distance. I mean, you got great chipping videos on your YouTube.
Absolutely.
You really helped my chipping come along too, and we had started with the distance.
Yes.
And then we moved into those things. Cole, and you're one of the best putters I've ever played with. Right. Like, it's actually, when you're on a hot streak, it's something else to watch, I gotta say. And it's really fun, because actually, one of the most fun things about golf to me is definitely hitting it far, but making a lot of putts is cool too. Absolutely. It's super fun. But you're always just going to have better chances. Like the bottom line is, if you're hitting your putts on average to 40 feet every time, which is great.
Second shot.
Yeah, you're not going to make a ton of birdies. If you want to make a few more birdies, you got to hit it closer. The best way to do that is to get the ball close to the green, right?
Yeah. But you're going to see, like, they're like, oh, the thing is, maybe you don't have the time to dedicate to do that, because like going from a 14 to a 7 is so much easier than going from a 7 to a 0.
Yeah, and you know, I said you could get to a 0. That's going to take some work. Eventually,
100%,
resistance
100%.
is going to kick in.
For the average guy who just wants to get in breaking 80,
Yeah.
or just wants to get to the point where they're like, maybe they play 2, maybe 3 times a week, which is a lot for the average person.
It is a lot,
to be honest. Like, without having to do too much practicing, figuring out how to putt better isn't going to be it.
No.
Right? Because like you're going to be averaging in and around 2.5 putts like a hole, like for the most part.
And that's the way I'd see it. I'd say it's mostly this stuff to start, and then really dialing down to that 0 and stuff's going to be playing 6 days a week, and then that's where your putting is going to get dialed in. Right?
I always say it's like, listen, like the big stuff that's going to move the needle is your health first, getting yourself in good shape, getting yourself faster, getting better ball striking and mechanics, and then once you get into the single digit range, course management, like what we talked about today, and then you work into a lot of short game. Because the reason I say short game is necessarily last is because there's so many more variables and so many more shots that you have to play in and around that part of the game, where it's like driver off the tee, you have one shot shape, hit that shot shape, that's it. Where it's like, okay, now I'm chipping, it's like, okay, is it like an open face chip, am I trying to elevate it, what's the grass like you have so many more variables to think about, whereas like when you're hitting driver off a tee box, you're hitting it off a tee and it's sitting there. It's not moving. There's no lie in the way. It's literally just driver and you and the ball, that's it. Right?
So I guess what you're saying, to become sort of a really good driver of the ball, it's a lot simpler than, say, trying to improve your short game that proportionate
100%.
amount.
And it's a lot more fun. You're going to be able to improve your game a lot faster. And again, this is from like the double digit to the single digit range.
Right.
When you start getting into the single digits, yes, your short game becomes even more important and figuring out how to read greens correctly and all that stuff. But in order to break 80, like you don't have to have all of these skills. And you don't even have time. Most people don't have time to practice all of these skills. Right? So it's like, let's do the things that you know you can do. You can get your ass in the gym. You can get stronger. You can get faster. You can get better ball striking doing a drill for 10 to 15 minutes a day. You've proven that, right? So it's like it's not as much as people think. And then if you get to that point and you want to kick it up a notch, then we can have that conversation.
Right, absolutely.
Right? So
awesome.
Good conversation. I'm glad. I hope this helps you guys in relation to accuracy, where to aim pins, where to aim at pins, where to aim away from pins, gives you guys some statistics and some representation of like what's actually statistically possible versus like setting unrealistic expectations for yourself. So make sure when you guys are standing over golf shots, you guys are going for pins that you're not necessarily aiming at every pin. We're playing to the safe side of the hole and we're avoiding the big miss versus trying to force more birdies.
Awesome.
So hope that helps you guys. And as always, stay tuned for the next one and stay fast.